Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui te iwi, kia ora koutou I te whānau o te wāna o Aotearoa, ngā mihi nui he aroha nui ki a. Listen, I'm Richard Neal, I'm the director of Tītoko, ko tūhoi me kahununui o kuiwi, taki timu a mātātua te waka. I'm the director of success or Tītoko at my institution. If there's success, hopefully that's me by the name. But in looking at the whakapapa of Tītoko, it's the spirit that feeds the sail on the waka, that gives strength to the komaru, which is the sail. And I think that's quite appropriate in the sense of services. The main event is teaching and learning, right? The main event is teaching and learning. And so if we add speed to that waka and we give it the potential to go further, to be more, then I'm happy with that. But I never delude ourselves that that's what we are. We support the main event, which is our teaching and learning. I run a few teams within Herenga Waka, which is admissions, enrolment, student success teams, all the way through to graduation and transition. So a fairly wide portfolio designed to sort of stretch us along the tauire life cycle. My colleague with me today is Caleb. He's a senior advisor in our student success team. I wanted to sort of show you what it's like from a very strategic level. This is why we did it. This is how we get it. But actually, to really get down into the detail, this is how we deliver our version of holistic support. And so Caleb's the one that actually deals with our students day in, day out, and leads and supports our teams in that area. So looking forward in that space. I'm going to get going and just sort of tell you to strap in, because we've got 20 minutes. So I'm not going to give you the entire whakapapa of where we started and where Te Herenga Waka got started off. I'll probably do a slight injustice to the way in which we engaged and how we got there, because I really want to get into the meat of this subject, right? So forgive me for that, but it comes from a good place because I want to try and get down to some practical ones. Now, I'm also expecting a lot of revenge questions from other institutions, so get stuck in. I'll be like the Simon Cowell and Caleb's like J-Lo. Okay, so we'll get started. And tell me if this is working. Hold on. Yeah, are we good there? Veronica, just give me a nod. All right, well, let's get started. So this is our version of holistic support at Te Herenga Waka. And I just want to say, if you're really interested in moving the dial, I wholeheartedly agree with the TSC and our other whānau that it's actually got to be institutional wide. So we're going to drill down today, and I'll just cover off that once over lightly. So before we started getting going, we wanted to figure out, well, here's a whole bunch of initiatives, but what does our past state look like? And what you're looking at now, and I'm hopefully not going to bore you with PowerPoint and stats, but this is the performance of our Māori and Pacifica tauira over the last 10 years. And I think what hits home about that is that our Māori and Pacifica whānau are consistently not doing as well as our non-Māori tauira, and that's been the case for 10 years. If you go back another 10 years, it's still a flat line. Quite a lot of volatility in the COVID period, and not in a good way. Here were communities that were particularly vulnerable to those circumstances, and we're seeing it in their first year retention rates. Now that tells us some fairly sobering things. I think at best, all of the things that we've been doing to try and look at retention have either held the tide or achieved nothing. It's a pretty brutal way to have a look at it. And so what we have to do is, if you want to think about moving this forward or actually making progress, what we have to start thinking about, well, what we've currently had in the toolbox hasn't done the job. So the only way you're going to get forward is you're going to have to do something a little bit differently. And so where we're hoping to go is to actually start looking at delivering our version of what equity is, which I think at the very least is all of our communities doing as well as they can, in our institution looking like the community that it's trying to help, both in terms of its representation of tauira there, but also their achievements. And to us, that's really important. And that's laid out in our learner success plan, which is on our website. So we want to turn the dial, but it is a it's a big whale mouth, it's a big steep curve. And so little things that don't scale, tiny activities, anything that we've been doing before, we know isn't going to do what it takes to get there. So it's going to have to be a big push. The other question is, and I'll get down to the evil word of money, but it pays the bills, is why retention matters. 63% of the Fs at Herenga Waka are from returning students. So, I mean, it's a really important part of who we are. And for every domestic equivalent full-time student, that equates to about $50,000 to our organisation over the duration of their qualification for a level 7. So it's no small thing to make sure that this is within the organisation. We also have a social obligation. I don't have to go too far into it, but only 50% of our Māori and Pacifica whānau are graduating. That to me is deeply worrying, that you bring these people into our organisation and it flips on a coin about whether or not they're going to work out with a qual. I actually think in terms of social contribution, you bring people in, you take 2, maybe 3 years of their life, you hit them up with a massive student loan and they walk out with nothing. You've really got to start asking yourself the question of, are we contributing to society or are we actually taking it backwards in some ways? So at Herenga Waka, it's become extremely important to us that we actually rectify that, and it's a big part of what we want to be and who we want to be. And also, it makes sense. We get that pulled together. There's an extra $10 million a year coming into the institution, which we can reinvest. I don't want to have to do the numbers on what I think the TEC might be pouring down a hole if we don't complete these students, but it's certainly something we want to have a look at. And again, just quickly looking to the left, from our perspective, where the real attrition happens is primarily in the first year. So we need to really drill down in that space. And if we can get them through to second, they've got a higher chance. And if we can get them to the third, they're pretty close home and home. So I think that what that tells us is that we need to front load our activity if we want people to get along in the mix. Right. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this, but I'm just saying the holistic support program is one of our value chains that we're trying to put together. So it's one of the many things that we're trying to do, but for us, it's important and it's an important part. I don't want to step back from the fact that in the classroom, how they get here, how they're financially supported, these are all factors, and everybody has their particular circumstances that suit them and that are important to them. But I'm just going to talk about that today. And this again is our roadmap on our learner success plan. So last night I woke up and I couldn't sleep, so I just decided to put together probably one of the worst PowerPoints ever, but I wanted to make a point. So I'm coming from a student services angle, and what I've noticed when working with other institutions is whoever's leading this brings their DNA to the mix. So what you want to be really careful of is, if you're a student services person, is for you, you're a hammer and everything you look like looks like a nail. So every time you look at an opportunity or something missing, you go, oh, we need more student services, or we need a student service. And what I want to be really careful about is, I'm not sure if that's the total equation, but you've got to be careful how you approach it. So for example, we would offer about $14 million per annum in student services across the institution. You look at the last 10 to 20 years, the question is that making a dent? We don't know, which is the big question. Now, there's millions of anecdotal stories, but is it moving the dial? We don't know. And so often student services people go, oh, well, we're trying to solve a bit of a thing. We'll put ourselves in the middle and then we'll get our students to engage with us. And what we've found, and I've seen this at a couple of institutions, is that you think that you're helping the students in need. But what I can see from the utilisation is that the people that engage with these services, by definition, are highly engaged people. And the people that you're trying to support, to try and keep there, are by definition, by everybody's that I can see at the moment, are gradually starting to disengage from your institution. So when you provide student services, who are the people that are using those services? Highly engaged people, or people that we would determine as low needs. As you get out with moderate needs and people with very high needs, by definition, they're hard to get to. Do you know? So if you say, come to the mountain, you're actually making it really difficult for them. And you're also treating yourself as the destination. And if you want to be student-centred, sometimes people go through a whole bunch of ways of thinking about it. Oh, well, we need to do more work. Let's build more mountain, right? So let's increase and double the size of our student services. And my question would be, Well, if you're not sure whether or not it works, doubling something that doesn't work doesn't necessarily produce an output, but, you know, I stand to be corrected. We can have a look at that. You know, so I'm not convinced that that's the way forward, okay? Sometimes we go, market the mountain. Actually, we've totally got the solution. Let's just market to people that they need to come to us and utilize our services. I myself am a little bit skeptical about that, but sometimes they develop and they go, no, we need to be student-centered. We need to make the mountain student-centered, which still works off the premise that the mountain is a solution, or when they tend to engage with students, and let's just say it's through digital surveys or surveys and stuff, who are the type of students that respond to that type of channel? Highly engaged students. And so when you're starting to become student-centered and you start asking students, how should we present this? If you're not very careful on who you're trying to approach, you will actually build a student service that still suits the majority and not the people that are most at need. Now, there are plenty of examples of people being very purposeful and coming to moderate and very high needs. Peking has been excellent in terms of its community and strategic engagement, but you've got to be intentional and purposeful. If you just throw out an email and ask them what they want, it'll be the highly engaged students that will answer, and that's the type of solution you'll get, a perpetuation of the same solutions. So from our perspective, what we wanted to do was flip the model. And again, it's not a new idea. Georgia State, other people have been doing it. You've heard presentations from Waikato, Canterbury, and there's still people from Open Poly that are doing it. But to flip the circle, and it's the idea of how do you tear apart the mountain and actually take it out into those communities. It's not a new idea. If you ask a question just on a slightly different perspective, how do we engage with our Pacifica and Māori communities? It isn't about going, let's get them here and then they can enrol in us and pay $20,000 at the halls. There are institutions out there that have high percentages of those that build campuses in those communities, AUT. There are providers out there that build campuses in rural communities, the polytechnic sector and the private sector. So we have, there are people that will build home-based programs, people that will teach in prisons, you know? So you've got to take the mountain to the people if you're going to do it. And that is the ethos behind what we were thinking about with our holistic support model. Right. And so once again, these words are controversial and we want to be careful, but the intention is there. We segmented our groups into very high need, moderate need, and low need. And we want to engage with our low need students, but if you're going to make it, well, then it'll be low touch. But if you're going to struggle, we need to identify that as quickly as possible and get on track as fast as possible. And we're going to dedicate the lion's share of our resource into that area because that's where we want to make the difference. Again, I'm cautious of anything that looks like the last 10 years because that, to me, is simply rolling out the old solution. So we need to give it a go. So just quickly in terms of background, I mean, we came across this in 2017. We set up a project, we looked into it, we worked with others in terms of achieving the dream and coming together with communities. We built a framework, which is our pioneering framework, which is a presentation unto itself, but it's definitely our kaupapa and values-based approach to what we're doing. And then we established a division, which is working on that. We also we've rolled out our holistic advisor model and it is now operating at scale this year. So every student will receive an advisor, but I'll let Caleb go through the particulars.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, so I'm here to talk a little bit more about what we're actually doing as advisors and being a part of that mountain that's being moved and trying to really address the students then. So this is kind of a high-level framework for what the success plan looks like. So it's that first step of identifying the students. So using analytics from day one to identify what the students of the highest need category and the moderate need categories that we wanted to be addressing with our services, and then assigning that to an advisor and then walking them through the actual process of advising, supporting, just communicating with, interacting with on a daily basis and what that kind of looks like. And then from that, at the very bottom there, you can see the technology along there, that the actual systems that are now in place to kind of aid that. And we'll just kind of walk through that in the next couple slides. This is, again, a higher level, kind of a calendar of a sort, but based on the specific trimesters of what's being done in a week-to-week basis. So that specific plan, again, from identifying into the actual actions that are being here. So if you can take a quick look, I know there's a lot of information on that slide, but the basis of identifying them, kind of seeing how they're initially getting on, reaching out, making that initial contact points, seeing who responds, and then getting back to them and escalating where need as well too. This is mostly being done through email and being tracked along the way too. I know there's different plans out there for other methods like texting and things like that, but at this point we're focused on emails.
Yeah, so and we'll go through it a bit more in detail. I know it's a bit whistle stop, but we have about 30 people on the team. They have a ratio of about 700 to 800 students. Each advisor gets a percentage of high need students, about 5% or something, but sometimes seniors like Caleb will get a slightly higher proportion, and then they'll get a mixture of our mid needs, and then they will be given this sort of scripted engagement plan, and then it also has a more interactive element will come through. But one of the things, again, it's not like just any normal nudge plan. We've actually built a series of technical tools around it, which was pretty full on for a year and a half. So the reporting's got to be cutting edge and top rate. So all the information coming through, all the advisors would have dashboards. We're now building dashboards for our community so they can see. We're also building dashboards for the students that they can actually see where they are. We've rebuilt our learning management system. Before it was Blackboard, now it's Nuku. We've rebuilt, I think it's 3,000 courses. And we built them in such an intentional way that we get the right information that we want in terms of their engagement. So that was built new this year from scratch. We had to train every single staff member and rebuild every course. And we built them based on what we considered to be best case practice, where it provided the right type of learning environment and the right type of information. We then had to build a CRM, Kurawai, which is a fragment of Microsoft Dynamics. It wasn't enough to do this work. We had to record it. We had to have the community see where it was. So if Pacifica was engaging with a student, they needed to know that our advisor was engaging. If counselling was engaging, they needed to see that everybody is. We wanted a single view of the student to be available to every part of the community within the bounds of what was appropriate for that information. The other thing is we also needed a system to escalate, to tell where the student is, and for that student to know where they were. So it was really important. We also built on top of that a student portal and knowledge base. It meant that when we gave advice, we would have a reference point for the single point of truth. When we built this with students at the beginning, they said, I talked to 20 people, they tell me 20 different things. There's no consistency of information. And when I talk to someone and they throw me on to the next one, I have to repeat my story. And it was deeply irritating to them. So we needed to create a single point of truth, and we needed to create a point where our people could engage with them, see their story beforehand, and so they could just jump off where they were if they needed to, and have an escalation system. Oh, I rang them, no one ever rang me back. So they have an escalation point, it highlights in red, and it keeps escalating until someone answers them. Still needs a bit of working through, but it's there. And a one-stop shop. So we actually built them a portal. They can enroll, they can pay their fees, they can get their library books out, they can get all their timetabling. We wanted to create a single point where students would find things that they needed and was useful, and then that would be the platform for how we engage with them. So there was quite a lot of thinking about how we put this all together, and there were multiple system builds before we started actually doing the holistic advising, because we wanted to get basically the footprint right before we started jumping in, and we wanted to move completely at scale.
Yeah, so these next couple slides will be just a couple snapshots of what these systems look like in a bit more detail from the staff perspective here. So this is the Power BI, the reporting system that everything's built on. You can see the note of that we focus on the highest needs students again first, which are identified in that commencing care pathway, built on a various algorithm that identifies factors that I don't frankly even know all about, but they're identified in this by the red commencing care pathway, and that is what myself as an advisor can filter down this report by my cohort. You can see the name, the advisors there on the list, and you can filter it down by your cohort, select the kind of week that you're in, and the students that you want based on the commencing care pathway. And then the other factor here is the interaction-based risk, which is the actual what is happening going on in their course right now. Have they registered for the tutorials? Have they signed up for labs? Are they engaging on the online course pages as well in comparison to the rest of their peers in the course as well? So it's combining some of that initial proactive data alongside the initial engagement, then to get into a bit more of the actual course engagement.
Yeah, so just to jump in and to quickly go back, how do we start with a red, orange, green, right? So we look at their NCA results and we look at what they've studied relative to what they're trying to study, and then they're given basically a risk rating. And let's be clear, it's an educated guess based on previous data, but we have validated this through a whole bunch of different mechanisms, but they get there. But that's not where they stay. If school hasn't been for them and they get to university and they're loving it and they're nailing it and they're engaging and submitting, they come off, right? So what we do is we take a best guess and then we validate it up against their actual engagement in the institution. So your rating can change, and hopefully it does. Sorry.
Yeah, that's good. I can learn things too. Yeah, so then we can take those initial students that we identify as the high risk from those reporting systems and then drill down further into actual the NUCU system. So we can see the same information that students can see, both from a full view at the staff level, but also specifically what only students can see. And just talk to them about their courses if needed, about that at upcoming assessments or how they're doing in the course, but then also drilling down into actual, if they've submitted things and what the results are for the course. So you can kind of see this is kind of step through at a finer level of what that looks like. You can search courses, select them, go into those course pages, and that little new analytics part that's highlighted there is where we actually click to get into the further details. So you can get really into the weeds if you want, or keep it sort of pretty high level. This is looking at the course in general of where all students are at within a specific course. But then we also can step into further detail of focusing in on individual students, which would be a little bit more where we're normally using it, because we've already identified the students that we're looking out for and wanting to be in tune with how they're doing, and can see the courses that they're enrolled in, go right there, see if they've submitted things recently, that when we reach out to them and when we talk to them, we can acknowledge how they're doing and not just have them tell us how they're doing always, which there's different stories that you might hear within that. But yeah, so there's different methods here of, again, time spent on page, submissions, and then also there's capability for lecturers to message students that we can see through there as well. And then all this is tracked within the content management system, Kurawai. And this is what the real meat of our work as advisors is, that where everything gets kind of tracked through, you can make cases of different types. This is specifically holistic advising that we entitle all of these as, and track the different engagements, the initial contact we have, any responses we get, and where the needs are for that student. Also, just noting that all of our advisors are also trained for the enrollment system as well too. So we're at the same time giving course advice and actually doing the registrations as well too. So where changes are need to be made, we're also empowered to make those changes actively and to support them, and just know what they need to do to complete the degree and be able to support them in a full picture. It does require, frankly, a lot of information, the finer details to be known at the advisor level, but it does, where we are able to bring all those things together, can really provide quite holistic support across their program of study.
And just to be clear, Māori and Pacifica students get 2 advisors. So they've, and we made a bit of a mistake, but we learned. So we thought, oh, well, we'll give you one of our advisors and then you can ask for a Māori and Pacifica advisor. And then it turned out very quickly that they would prefer to have the Māori and Pacifica first advisor right up front. So they became the default primary advisor, and then we come in with the nudging. So we would attend to the holistic requirements as a person before we start drilling down into the academic requirements. And that was a lesson that we learned quite quickly in the mix. That was a student preferred way of dealing with it. The way that we make sure that is a very formal arrangement is that we have very strong partnership agreements with all of our service areas, being very clear about the expectations that we need for our students across that. So it's not ad hoc, it's quite purposeful.
Just the last slide here within that same content management system, just to note how most of this is focused on those first year students, but then we're also able to use these same systems as well as to track academic progress of students who haven't passed at least half their points that they're enrolled in. We also generally can put under restriction to ensure that they're passing all the courses that they're enrolled for and succeeding in that way. But all these same systems can be used to go in and see the detail to really provide that foundation and backing that we have as advisors to go to them with real knowledge rather than just being, how's it going? And I think something's maybe wrong.
So just to sort of reiterate that we had to change the policy. So, it's not just about, oh, let's try to get these people to pass. What do you do if they don't? So what's the next step from that? Well, if they don't, we meet with them, we develop a plan, and this is now a compulsory policy, and then we develop a pathway for them, but we also restrict how much study they can do and keep it tight, right? So again, that's a test. We're in our first year, but for us, it's like, oh, you don't give up once you don't make it. You've got to keep going. And again, that was an academic change to the calendar, and again, one of those sort of examples of moving our policy to match our behaviour. On top of this, again, this may mean nothing to anyone, but that's a macro view of what a student is. What we're now building is a learner success dashboard. Okay, so how are our courses going? And how are they relative to equity achievement? So I've given you the nicest ones up the front, but you can actually drag down. And so if someone's 6 points away from achieving, 6 percentage points away from achieving equity, so let's just have a look at the top one with 6. So equity is 0. They've achieved equity with non-Māori and Pacifica and Māori have achieved equity with non-Māori. If they're +6, they're doing better. But if they're -6, they're doing worse. And so we didn't want to approach it just at a individual level. We wanted to know what our courses were doing, what our programs were doing. And this is a hot off the press and was quite shocking. The variability between our programs and the performance of our Māori Pacifica students is highly variable. And so we've had to kind of come back and go, crikey, that's a lot to think about. And we've even found instances where you have the same course that is taught in 2 different faculties, but it's essentially the same course with very different outcomes. So there's a huge amount of learning. But from our perspective, it's like, well, if we're going to achieve equity, it can't just be at an individual level. We need to know what the school's responsibilities are, what the faculty's responsibilities are. So what we're looking at doing is setting targets for our faculties and our programs and our courses, because it won't just be a nicely how she goes if you're going to get there in 10 years. So there's a whole lot of things, and off to the right, you can actually see the variation of some courses relative to their Māori Pacifica in a very specific area. Now, we haven't quite drilled down on this one because the results are frankly kind of shocking. So, there's a lot to think about in that space, but nevertheless, you had to expect something, right? So there it is on that one. Again, at the end of the day, it was a big complex system. We spent millions of dollars. It costs a lot to maintain, but it's nothing unless it works. So we're hoping that this year we've got some results where we can show some progress. We've set some targets for ourselves. It performed well under pilot, but let's see if we can nail it at scale. We've done some student evaluation of it. There is definitely some learnings that we've discovered. So once you pull everything out of the faculty and start operating as an institution, you start running into the inconsistency in our institution. And our students have often told us, well, we do it differently in law, and I'm doing a co-jur in commerce, and you've got 2 different languages you're trying to speak to me. So it's pulled out a lot of learnings, but nevertheless, we think that's a really important part of kind of develop the way forward. I will try and unshare this and close up. So just to sort of end on it, there's a few things that have been really interesting that we should go down and chase. So when we started checking, for example, they get a risk rating or a needs rating, we then check their engagement, we drive our interventions, we check our engagement again, is it making a difference? When we started checking things like assignments, we suddenly realised, gosh, there's a lot of assignments that students have to achieve. Then we started thinking, I think we're over-assessing. this is kind of way too much. Then we started collecting that data to going, is there a relationship with students with clashing assignments and performance? Yes, there is. Oh my God, like this. And so we've actually got terabytes of data that we've had to build new servers to try and accommodate. And it's just about getting in there and understanding it. But by crikey, what a learning mission it's been. And again, it's nothing until it achieves something. So we'll tell you next year whether or not we've got something to cry about. But I would hope that what I'm trying to point out is don't do what we do. Move the mountain in a way that matters to you, to your people, and you'll be making progress. And test it. Assume that what we currently do does not work, and they'll prove me wrong right back. And if you do that, there are things that we were doing which we should disinvest from and reinvest in the things that are doing. This theory that I'm talking about isn't new, it's scientific method. It's been around for 900 years, right? So we just need to apply it outside an academic context and into our own context. And I'll leave it there, and hopefully we can put a bit of fire under the belly. Yeah.